Welcome, everybody. I'm glad to see you here tonight. I don't know what the weather is like in your location. I'm outside of Philadelphia and it just started snowing this afternoon. I know Ron's in Brooklyn. He mentioned that it's snowing there, but whatever the weather is, I'm glad you guys are here tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Debbie Schwartz and I'm the founder of Road to College and the Paying for College 101 group. My goal in starting all of this has always been to educate families about higher ed and particularly college admissions with a focus on how to pay for college. So that's why I'm so excited about tonight and our guest, Ron Lieber. And we're talking about his new book, The Price You Pay for College. Here, let me put it up. Sorry, it's backwards, but you guys get the idea. I've known Ron for a while, and I know that he's got a ton of insights on the topic for paying for college, and we're going to try and get as much out of him out of tonight as we can. So welcome, Ron. Thanks for being here.
Good evening, everybody. I want to start by thanking this community. Some of you may have seen me wandering around the threads over the years, asking questions or just hanging out or spitballing commentary at various points. I did a lot of different things to report this book, but the single most useful thing I did was start hanging around the Facebook group 4 or 5 years ago. And so to all of you, who have been around for a while, who continue to be patient with the newcomers in particular, but to all of you who so thoroughly and fully and generously and patiently share your knowledge with me and with others, I want to say thank you. This resource is priceless. And it's been particularly useful for me as a reporter. And so I just wanted to start by saying how grateful I am, and also to apologize to the extent that a whole bunch of newbies show up because I said some version of this in the book. My apologies in advance, but please be gentle to them.
Well, absolutely. Ron, I was thinking about it. I think you joined when we had I don't know, maybe like 1,000 or 2,000 members, and now we have 90,000 people. So that's just kind of amazing. And I also appreciate everybody in the community, and you kind of ride the ups and downs of the cycle every year, and as new people come in, everybody, what I actually love seeing is people who I know kind of started a year ago and they've learned so much. And then like a year later, they're telling other people, how to do things. So that's kind of like the little cycle of the Facebook group. Okay, so let me give a little bit of housekeeping before we really start. And so I appreciate Dan for asking people where they're from and what year their kids are. I can see we have people from all over the place: Montana, Oregon, Texas, California, Nevada. That is great to see all that. So put your questions in the chat. I cannot promise that we'll get to everything, but we will try. I also have questions that people emailed in advance. I will just kind of give a little bit of a plug that if we don't get to a question tonight, we're actually going to do a Facebook Live with Ron and Parents Live on Wednesday. So we'll try and capture those questions and ask them on Wednesday if we don't get to them tonight. Let's get started. So let me give everybody a little background on Ron if you don't already know. He's been the New York Times Your Money columnist since 2008. And before working at the New York Times, he wrote the Green Thumb personal finance column for the Wall Street Journal and was also part of the startup team there in the personal journal section. Ron has written 2 books before this. His first book was called Taking Time Off, Inspiring Stories of Students Who Enjoyed Successful Breaks from College and How You Can Plan Your Own College, about gap years, right? Was that primarily what that book was about, Ron?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then his second book, which was in 2015, was called The Opposite of Spoiled, Raising Kids Who Are Grounded, Generous, and Smart About Money, which was an instant New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller. So also about money and families and parenting. And now his recent book, again, just published just last week, or it hasn't even been a week, right, Ron? Tuesday
Nope,
is
Tuesday.
Officially 7 days, yeah. Is The Price You Pay for College, an entirely new roadmap for the biggest financial decisions decision your family will ever make, and it's already off to a great start. You're also the father of two, a high schooler and one in elementary school. And if people don't know, Ron's also married to Jodi Kantor, who's also a very well-known journalist and an author in her own right. So that's another little tidbit. So as Ron mentioned, he and I met like about, I don't know, probably about 5 years ago. And ever since, we've always like chatted about all the issues related to higher ed. But what I've always really appreciated when I've gotten the chance to talk to Ron is that his perspective of coming to things really from like the everyday person's viewpoint and trying to explain it on, just the average person's level, which I think is so important because people get so uptight about finance. And I'm going to mention 3 things which kind of are going to structure the evening about, again, what I think Ron is so good at. He's great at understanding the systems behind processes and what drives people's decisions, and then showing you and explaining, what those different pieces of the system are. And that really particularly relates to the process of paying for college. He recognizes, which I really appreciate because I came from the world of financial services, that personal financial decisions are more personal than they are finance. So we make these decisions, right? And sometimes we're staring at the numbers, or we think it's about the money, and it partly is, but it's also a lot of emotion in every personal financial decision that you make. And the last thing is that he wants to empower people, right? With his books and his writings, and particularly in this topic. And I feel, again, a kinship with this. I feel like that you're trying to make people consumers of higher ed. We have to kind of approach this process, as we do any other consumer process. So those are 3 really important pieces of tonight. And I think you're going to see it as we continue in the conversation. So before we delve in to those areas, Ron, I think it'd be so interesting for you to tell people kind of like why or how you got interested in this topic, the topic of college, this phase of life. I mean, it's actually kind of ironic. Your book is coming out at a perfect time, but you've been working on this for years, so you couldn't have planned it this well. But, how did you get started, or what made you, so interested in focusing on this?
I mean, in some ways, this book goes back to 1988 when I was applying for college myself. So my family had been through some rough circumstances financially, and I was on scholarship at a private school in Chicago, and the college counselor there just didn't know anything about financial aid. There were not a lot of kids on financial aid at the school, but he knew the person to send me to. There was this guy, the guy to see in the Chicagoland area back then, if you needed help figuring out how to pay for college. He had a consulting thing going on. And so we called the guy, and he gave us an address, where we should come visit the following Tuesday at 5 p.m. He said he'd, bring him $50 in cash. That was going to be the fee. So we show up at this address on Hinman Street in Evanston, and the office that he's given us is the Office of Financial Aid at Northwestern University.
Oh, wow.
And we're like, what is going on here? And so he literally directs us to the side door. Some of you familiar with the Rick Singer side door?
Right. I'm not sure that that's a good way of saying it now.
He sent us to the side door. I actually went back a summer or 2 ago and found the door, and my memory was right. It was the side door. We went in through the side door at 5 o'clock. All of his colleagues were gone for the day, and it became clear what was going on. He was the assistant director of financial aid at Northwestern, and he had this crazy side hustle going where he would bring in needy families after hours, and he would take your money and I assume not report it to the IRS, and then explain to you all of the secrets of the financial aid system. So, those of you who are 49 or above and ran the gauntlet yourself will remember this was pre-FAFSA. This was the FAF form. It was just as awful then as it is now. And he knew all the tricks. He knew, what to do legally to make yourself look a little bit more needy. And he kind of talked us through what was happening. And sure enough, I got into Amherst College. I got a fantastic financial aid package. He had coached us on, how to ask for more and how to appeal each year. And, we knew all the tips and tricks. And so, I got out of there with, just under $10,000 in in student loans, got them paid off in 10 years, and I was good to go. So it was probably no surprise that, after several years of trying to get my head screwed on straight in journalism, I eventually settled on personal finance. There were a couple of editors at the Wall Street Journal who kind of sized me up and, looked at the work that I had done today and the books that I'd written. And they said, what you don't understand about yourself, Ron Lieber, is that your beat is beating the system.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as they said that to me, all of these windows and doors started kind of flying open in my head. And, pretty soon I was writing stories for the Wall Street Journal about how to return your wedding gifts for cash. And so, I was kind of off and running, and they gave me a column in 2005. And that was right at the point at which I had my first kid. So right away, I start getting really interested in writing probably too many stories about how to save for college. And back then, for those of you with 15-year-olds or above who were kind of in the game back then, if you were paying attention, you could tell that those accounts weren't as good as they could be. The investment choices weren't as good, the fees were too high. And so, I spent a couple of years taking a battering ram to those, and I wasn't the only one. Eventually those savings programs got better. Then in 2008, 2009, by then I'm at the New York Times. This horrifying recession, and all of these people start washing out of, the NYUs and the USCs of the world with $100,000 in undergraduate student loan debt for which they had no cosigner. So this was insane, right? So I start writing about how to pay for college or how not to pay for college, as the case may be. So, that no cosigner issue got solved pretty quickly in the wake of the recession. But student loans continue to be a topic of interest to me, particularly in the last several years, as I discovered and wrote about and tried to help solve all of the problems with the public service loan forgiveness program. But starting about 2015, 2016, I started to get these alarming calls every spring from alarmed parents and families. These were New York Times readers. These were people who were sophisticated, often extremely successful in their own right professionally. And they were literally crying into my inbox, or if they knew me personally or got a hold of my cell phone, would literally, 11, 12 at night, in April, would be crying into the phone. And what had happened was that they had just completely missed the memo on how all of this worked. They did not know that Merit Aid existed. They were surprised when they were offered it. They did not know that they could negotiate. And they were realizing in March and April that their kid had applied to entirely the wrong set of skills.
Right.
And they had not been, honest with themselves or with their kid about what they were really going to be able to afford, or had been delusional or just sorely mistaken about the need-based aid that they would be offered. And so this felt deeply problematic to me, right? I felt like I had been failing them because, I'm supposed to be Dr. Money in the newspaper, and how is it possible that these people don't know what's going on? And I'd been writing all this stuff about college, right? So what was the problem here? And then I started getting a different set of calls. These were people who were relatively sophisticated about the system, and they understood on the front end that they might be facing a choice between Penn State at $125,000 all in over 4 years, Gettysburg at 175 or 200 with some merit aid, and Swarthmore Haverford at $300,000 because the family earns $250,000 a year and doesn't get offered any need-based aid, but definitely can't go around writing $75,000 checks easily, right? And so they're looking at all this, and they're looking at our newspaper, and we've got all these stories in the business section saying that we live today in the era of big data, right? And every industry is being blown to smithereens, and there's all this data, and it can be used in all of these great ways. And so they said, Ron, you've been spilling all this ink. Where are the stories that explain to me, using all this big data, why Haverford is $100,000 better than Gettysburg, and Gettysburg is $100,000 better than Penn State? And I had no idea. And I thought, wow, okay, I think I understand what's going on here. For all of the time that I've spent writing stories about how to save and how to pay, I had completely missed the most important question of all, which is what to pay for college. And as soon as I managed to reframe it for myself that way, I realized that that was an entirely new question in the world of personal finance. And as I attempted to get my head around it, I realized, wow, there is no way that I'm going to be able to answer that question in one newspaper column or 5 or 10. And immediately the light bulb started going off that that was my next book. And that was how it got started.
Yeah,
And that
no.
was, that was more than 5 years ago. It took a while to really get my head around it, and to stop being scared of the fact that the question, that I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to answer the question.
Right. No, that makes, I mean, you kind of see your whole trajectory of your career and your personal life coming together. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I'll tell you really quickly, I kind of got interested in this space similarly because I had friends who were kind of a few years ahead of me. And I remember a conversation very clearly with a very good friend of mine whose daughter got into, I won't tell you which school, but a flagship state school, which was out of state. And she was bemoaning to me and saying, why should I pay this out-of-state price, when my daughter's going to sit next to the, other students who are paying like 50,000 less, and is it really worth it? And I was like, you're right. Like that's a valid question to ask. So I'm glad you dug into it. And so let's get into, and I love systems. I love that you kind of frame things in systems as well. Maybe you can kind of give people a sense of what is this, all the different systems behind, like paying for college and college costs, and just to give them an idea. I know you go into a ton more depth in the book, but I think you can kind of like just give them a framework about the different, areas that they should be thinking about?
Sure. So, I mean, let's begin with the sort of statement of principle here, which is that this is enormously complicated and it is not your fault, right? So if you feel like you're being lectured to by me or by Debbie or by people on the boards, it is only because there are many lectures worth of explainers to provide. And none of us who are in the business of trying to explain this are defending the system, right? For better or for worse, my job at the New York Times is not on the op-ed page, right? I'm a news columnist, and my particular mandate is to help people exist and persist in the system as it is, right? And not as this in the system as we wish it would be. I have opinions about how I wish the system would be. And every so often, if I get the reporting right, I can help turn the screws on the system a little bit. And maybe that will be the case here. But my only goal was just to pull the curtain back and explain to people how all this works. So it took an entire section of the book. All of part 1 is about who pays what and why and how we got ourselves into this mess with this system in the first place. All right, so I try to explain why it is that prices got so high in the first place. But when we're talking about prices, we're talking about at least 4 different things, right? We're talking about list prices for private colleges and universities. We're talking about list prices for public colleges and universities, or otherwise known as the rack rate or the full retail price. And then there are the discounts for public and privates. So that's at least 4 different things. And as I think all of you know, different schools exist in different tiers of the marketplace. So there's different size discounts, and the prevalence of the discounts are different too. So, it begins by sort of laying it out that way. And then in terms of the why, right? To the extent that retail prices and even the net price that people actually pay are higher than they used to be and have gone up, at higher than the rate of inflation, which they have in many instances. What's the reason for that? And if you believe if you believe some of the more like outraged, feature stories you might read, or the stuff that you might see on the internet, where people are not as smart as the people are on the Paying for College boards, you'll think that it has something to do with climbing walls or lazy rivers,
Right.
or even brand new dorms or buildings. But the fact of the matter is that the vast majority of the costs at these schools come from people. They come from professors and they come from administrators. And if you read the Wall Street Journal editorial page, which I do on a regular basis, for a variety of both professional and personal reasons, you might come to the conclusion that these schools are beset by something known as administrative bloat. That's how the Wall Street Journal refers to it. They don't like administrative bloat so much, and they want us all to believe that academia has sort of run amok with associate deans of wokeness, at every level and in every department. And I guess I would make a different case. It is true that the costs that schools face have gone up because they have more administrators for every 1,000 undergraduates than they ever did before. But I guess my feeling about that is that, we get the administrators that we vote for at the ballot box, first of all. How does that work? Well, the people that you vote for, the politicians, the state legislators and the federal legislators, they're the ones who make the regulations. And those regulations make it easier for our disabled kids to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
Those regulations allow for equal time on the playing fields for our daughters. Those regulations have a lot to do with health diagnoses and access to facilities and campuses, and rights that accrue to people who have diagnosed mental illnesses. Those administrators keep the campus computer network up and running. They run the newly reinvented career offices that we all want our sons and daughters to benefit from. They staff the mental health counseling centers. And so if we've got a problem with those administrators, we can ask for something different by voting in a different way or by choosing different schools. But my guess is that if we went back to the same ratio of administrators per 1,000 undergraduates that we had a generation ago, parents would be up in arms about the fact that their kids were not being as well taken care of as they expect them to be. So I don't buy the bloat part of the argument. The fact of the matter is that good people, well-trained people are expensive. They make above average salaries, and we want our kids to be watched over to a certain extent. And so, we get the administrators that we ask for as consumers. And then there is the discounting, the pricing and the discounting mechanisms. And of course, we could go on for hours, and we'll get into some more detail on it in the coming moments. But the most important thing that I wanted to do for readers was just make them know, first of all, that merit aid exists. I mean, all of you on this call know what it is, I'm pretty sure. The number of people who just have no idea that this is going on, or how it works, or how it could benefit them, you would just be shocked.
No, I know. I mean, we've been talking about it for so many years that, like,
Yeah.
it's second nature. But I kind of seeing, honestly, and even just the past week, having, like, you're out there doing interviews and having this word merit scholarship, merit aid kind of become, just a normal word is, it wasn't the case. It's still very surprising to people that, that's the way the system works, and there are these discounts.
Yeah, it isn't. And why should people know, right? If your kid is coming through the system for the first time, and you went to college 25 or 30 years ago, and there's no reason you should know anything about this, right? So I tried to sort of reveal the wizard behind the curtain, because what I think even many people on the boards may not realize is that there is a pretty sophisticated machinery behind the scenes, with a half a dozen consulting firms, that have dozens of PhDs on staff, writing algorithms that suck in all of our families' data, all of our neighborhoods' data, and are often watching the behavior of our 16 and 17-year-olds as they respond to offers, tracking all that, sucking it in, putting it into a giant, whirring machine. And then it's the algorithms, more often than not, that are making the offers to our families. It is not individuals, up at 1 a.m. penciling out, whether somebody gets $17,000 on the first merit offer or $22,000. As with any industry, software is eating this one, but most of us just don't see it. And so I went to the annual conference of the leading consultant in this area and just sat there and listened to them talk for 3 or 4 days about all of the things they do behind the scenes. I went to the headquarters of another one and sat down with the founder, and he opened up his computer and he showed me his giant spreadsheet ranking every high school in the United States of America. And those rankings of your kids' high schools may have something to do with what kind of discount, if any, your kid gets because of the sort of predictability engines they've built in based on what they've been able to learn about the characteristics of other kids from that school who may or may not have gone to the school that you're targeting or might have rejected an offer. And so, they're using software to try and figure stuff out so that they can make you an offer that you are likely to say yes to, but not one that is $1 more generous than it needs to be.
I know, that's wild. And what's your feeling? I mean, I kind of quickly teach people about merit scholarships that there's automatic ones. You'll see those grids, on different website on the college websites that say, if your student has this GPA and this test score, you'll automatically get this dollar amount. And those grids are also kind of purposely created. They know exactly how many students are most likely going to fall into those different bands. And then there are other schools that are giving out merit scholarship, but you just know nothing about how they're giving out. They might review every application that comes through, but there's no disclosure about, how they're giving out money and who's getting what.
Yeah, and you don't always know what you're dealing with until you apply. But I guess the way to think about it is, to think about the level of desperation, of a particular institution, in the marketplace for teenagers, because that's what we're talking about here, right? This is a brutally competitive market, for better or for worse, and in many ways for better. We have more choices here in the United States, on a per capita basis and on just like a raw number basis than, I think any place on earth. In terms of there's, a couple thousand places our kids could go to get a bachelor's degree. And that's great, right? And so the way you need to think about it is like a rank ordered list of schools, and you can think about it, roughly by selectivity, or you could combine, the various U.S. news lists. But if you're starting as a family with a list of 30 schools, you might try ranking them in selectivity order. And what you'll find if you follow the steps that people outline all the time on the boards, or that I outlined in the book, you'll find that as you kind of go down the food chain, the schools are more and more aggressive and often more and more transparent. And so, there are a number of steps that you can follow, everything from, looking for a grid that probably won't be there, checking the net price calculator to see if it is in fact a merit aid prediction engine, which sometimes it is, but more often than not, particularly farther up the food chain, it's not, right? There are a tiny number of schools like College of Worcester in Ohio and Whitman in Washington that will do a merit aid pre-read of your application. So what does that mean? Before you even apply, you can just call up the school, and it's kind of like a concierge service. You just sort of hand over, your kids' data, and tell them a little bit about your family, and they'll let you know about how much merit aid, they might offer if your kid got in. And one of my goals for this book, and wow, there are 896 of you here. Please, 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 next year, the year after, if you're not already in the mix with your seniors, call up every school that your kid is interested in, if they offer merit aid, and say, Whitman College in Washington and College of Worcester in Ohio do merit aid pre-reads. I would like you to do one for my son or daughter as well. So this may feel like kind of a forward thing, right? But there's strength in numbers here. If we all do this, right? And you can say, Ron Lieber told me to do this, right? Ron Lieber said that this was okay. So that way it's not on you. You're not the pushy parent, right? You could just say, look, if this is going on at other schools, I would love it if you did this too. And if every one of us does this, and if you tell 5 friends to do this, there will be more Whitmans and College of Worcesters, and there will be more transparency, and there will be more predictability. And instead of having to beat the system, we'll break it.
Right. And I think that that's such an important point. And again, that's kind of like one of the things I mentioned at the beginning, that we are consumers of higher ed, and we shouldn't be afraid to ask for questions or ask colleges to do things that you need as a family to make a decision. And so, that's that feeling of empowerment, because you're making a big decision, your students making a big decision, your family's making a big financial decision. And if you need more information, then, you should feel comfortable asking for whatever that information is.
Yeah, and let me just give you like even more of a pep talk on that, because I totally understand that it's easy for me, 3 years out without a kid in tow when I go to visit these places, and a sort of repertorial mindset and 25 years of experience of, asking inconvenient questions of people in power. Like I understand that's not your vibe, right? It's not the easiest thing to just like tell people to do, or it's not the easiest thing for some people to do. But just keep reminding yourself that any place that offers merit aid does so because it has to, not because it wants to. And it has to because it is not in the tippy top strongest position of the marketplace. And if it's not in the tippy top strongest position of the marketplace, then it knows that it's competing in the marketplace for 17 and 18-year-olds. And because it's competing, it's not going to be offended if you ask for a merit aid pre-read nicely. They might tell you no at places like Northeastern or USC or Tulane that have used merit aid so effectively that they now, only accept a something teen percentage of their applicants, right? But if enough of us ask for it, they're going to need to respond. And if they get the sense that, their competitors are doing it, and they're not, it's going to put them at a competitive advantage. In the very least, they're going to need to cough up more data on what happened with merit aid last year, and not just bury it in the common data set, where we all have to dig in there and, back out numbers using calculators. If enough of us ask, and we do so politely, the worst thing that happens is that they say no. They're not taking names of, parents who are asking questions about value and then throwing those questions in somebody's file and then rejecting the kid. That's not how this works.
Enter your meeting ID followed
Oops,
by pound.
sorry. I think somebody is going to need to mute, and oops, I think I can mute them right now. Hold on. Okay, they got muted. But what I also want to point out is, as you're describing this, Ron, is that people need to on some level recognize that colleges are a business. Everything you're talking about are just almost basic business principles that happen in any other industry. And so I think for so many years, myself included, we kind of thought of like, colleges as this, Ivy Tower, and, that they were kind of in a different, they just work differently than just regular business. But it doesn't really work that way. And the people that you're talking about, admissions officers, are also called enrollment management. And they're just like, marketing people at some level, at a company that need to bring in new customers. And they've got, in this case, a little harder job because they've got a fixed asset that they've got to, optimize for. And if you start thinking about it that way, you kind of understand and can kind of see all the different, moves that are happening. And they're not so strange anymore, so maybe that gives people some comfort too in kind of asking the questions that we're pushing them to ask.
Yeah, I mean, Debbie, you've been incredibly plain spoken about that over the years, and I think it really has made a difference for the people in your orbit. And I'm just trying to mimic you by doing the same thing. And again, let me just tell you, you should really know how these people talk when you're not around and they've forgotten that someone like me is there. They're literally speaking in terms of, classic sales tunnels. So, for any of you who work in for-profit businesses, if you work in sales, or if you've ever done sales training or ever been exposed to salespeople, there's like a funnel, and you get your prospects up in the top, and then they sort of sift down, they fall out until eventually you have your customers. This is exactly how they talk about you when you're not around. Another way to think about it is, I'm a total airline junkie, and I'm a complete frequent flyer mile maniac, and I know way more than I should about how these airlines run, and have written about it more than a little over the last quarter century. And so I was just, tickled when in the higher education industry, they started referring to what they do as enrollment management, because that sounds a lot like yield management.
Yep.
And for those of you airline junkies, I see some nodding there. In 1981, yield management was invented by American Airlines using mainframe computers. And it was all the same thing. They were sucking in a whole bunch of historical data to try and figure out which customers would respond to which offers. And it's how we ended up, in the situation where we are today, where it can feel like, everybody on the airplane is paying, a different price. And maybe there's something wrong with you if you're paying the full price, right? This is not that much different, right? The plane backs away from the gate, and the empty seats are worthless. The semester starts, and if there are not heads and some beds, the college has some real financial problems on its hands. And so, the parallels to business are everywhere. And really, we shouldn't be surprised, right? Given the amount of money that's being thrown around here, and the size of the checks that most of us will be writing. It makes perfect sense that there is like $1 billion in like consulting machinery and fees and marketing companies and retention consultants and all of it. I mean, it shouldn't be surprising, but I see why it is for people who are approaching it for the first time, and just remember, being sort of supplicants trying to get into these schools, and, have memories of the places, not really feeling like they were driven by revenue.
Right. And actually, somebody in the chat mentioned, she said, so true. College is a business, but so emotionally charged because it has to do with people's children. And that's like, bingo. That's exactly, that's where they got you.
I mean, should we go there, Debbie?
Yep.
Okay, let's go there. All right. So for starters, wait, let me tilt my screen back. Up there above my head, you'll see an equation that you may not be able to make out. But what it says is money equals feelings. And I never work more than 10 feet from the money equals feelings equation. For about a decade at the New York Times, I edited a guy named Carl Richards, who's also a good friend now. And Carl just had a knack for taking somewhat complex financial notions and boiling them down to something that you could draw with a Sharpie on a napkin. And he would draw equations, and he would draw Venn diagrams and other stuff. And if this sort of stuff interests you, you should follow him on social media and get his book called The Behavior Gap, which is maybe the best book that's ever been written about personal finance and emotions. And so Carl's equation, money equals feelings, is always something that I live by. And I always think about it before I start any of my New York Times columns. And so when I started reporting for The Price You Pay for College, the question I asked myself almost from the beginning is, what are the emotions that are involved in this process that are most likely to lead people astray and cause them to make sort of the wrong purchasing decisions and spend or borrow more than maybe they need to. And so this was something that I asked about, with every family that I talked to, and everybody at the college level. And it basically came down to three things. The first one is fear that if we do this wrong, our kids are going to go tumbling down the social class ladder that we have maybe spent decades or generations trying to climb. It's now essentially a 50-50 proposition as to whether our kids will do better than us financially. We have very good data on this now from Raj Chetty's lab at Harvard, and it's literally a coin flip. People with more privilege, their odds are probably a little bit better, but this is not a sure thing anymore. And so we worry about our kids somehow doing worse and it being our fault because we do it wrong during this process. Or, right, if we are starting from a place of lower income, we're worried that if we make the wrong choice with our, lights out student, that they won't really achieve the potential that we see in them and that others see in them. And, we want to get it right, but maybe we didn't go to college ourselves. And so, we're just afraid of getting it wrong. So fear is number one. Number two is guilt. Guilt that we do not earn enough, guilt that we did not save enough, guilt that we're pretty sure that we don't want to borrow a six-figure amount of money per kid to do this, guilt because our parents did it for us and we're not going to be able to do it the same way for our kids, guilt because our parents are still alive and whether they're saying so or not, we think they're watching us and judging us for not doing it the way that they did. Guilt, 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 guilt. And so part of what I'm trying to do, in section 2 of the book is kind of get people back from these guilt trips. And then the last one is the most complicated of all. And it's particularly complicated for me because I've seen myself, even in the last couple days, blowing it in public. And so this last one is about snobbery and elitism. And I try pretty hard to identify and even sometimes embrace my inner snob and elitists. Sometimes those instincts can be good for certain kids in certain instances with certain goals, but sometimes they're just downright embarrassing. And you know what? I'll just issue a challenge right now. If anybody can find where I blew it, right, where my inner snob led me astray sometime in public in the last 5 days, and you send me an email and point me to it, I'll send you 5 signed books to give out to anybody you want. Let's see if anybody notices, because when I showed it to my wife, she was like, Ron, you're being ridiculous. There's nothing wrong with this, but I saw it, right? So what are we snobby and elitist about? Well, we're worried about what the neighbors will think. We're worried what the neighbors did, right? We want the, Facebook sweatshirt reveal to be like a special moment for our families. We want the gold star as parents, whether we're willing to admit it or not, that, our kid got into this place or as opposed to that place, that our kid got into our alma mater, that our kid did better than we did in the college admissions derby. Or if it's not about us, maybe it's about the absolutely absolutely accurate perception of snobbery and elitism out in the world, in the marketplace for 22-year-olds, right? So whether it's graduate school admission or whether it's the kind of elite entry-level jobs that some 17-year-olds already know they want to pursue. Whole books have been written about this. There's a great one by an academic at Northwestern called Pedigree that's basically all about, the jerks at McKinsey who won't hire people from Cornell because there must have been something wrong with them that they didn't get into Princeton. This is a thing in the world. And it's only natural that we want to protect our kids from it, right? And so why are these emotions so profound? Well, you hinted at it in your question, Debbie, or maybe it was the commenter who did, right? The areas that I most love covering at my day job at the Times, I like writing about things that cost a lot of money, where there's a lot at stake, where there is a system at work that is hidden or partially opaque that I can help explain to people so they understand how to navigate it better, and where there are a ton of emotions that are, triggered by the process of being a consumer in this system, right? And so college, that's just it's like the mother lode of this, right?
Yeah.
Because it's our children. It's our children, and we're sending them off into the world. And if you've got 2 of them, and you're at least thinking about, the possibility of spending a couple $100,000 each, there's a pretty good chance that this could cost more than your house did, right? And it
Yep.
certainly feels, as or more consequential than whatever real estate purchases that you've made. And so, yeah, it's like a total head trip,
Yep.
and the schools know it,
So,
and
so how about
they use it.
So how about I'm going to get to some questions because we've got a ton, and they're all really good. And kind of let's use what we just talked about. If a family is facing, their student has gotten into, like, let's say the state's university, and maybe they were lucky enough to get into a more elite school, but it's going to put that family into debt. How do they make that decision? Like, how much money is worth it to pay for that more elite school, if at all?
Yeah, I so wanted there to be an algorithmic formula that fell out of my reporting that would answer this for everybody with, 17 sets of inputs, and then, and the school involved, and then it would tell you, it's worth $24,000 more, but not $124,000 more. I failed at that, and it was too high of a bar to set for myself. And here's the reason why. I mean, it's a cliche to say that every school is different and every family is different, but it also happens to be true. And so the problem that you run into in trying to give somebody a formulaic answer for that is that you just don't know what that applicant has a burning passion for, and exactly what sort of financial situation the family is facing. I am not here to shame anybody that takes out a Parent Plus loan. I am not here to shame anybody that will not pay more than whatever the state university costs. These are personal decisions. But I am here to shame people that don't set up a thoughtful process for themselves, right? What exactly is college for, right? That's just not philosophy 101. I outlined in the book that, 3 different ways to think about college and how to attempt to answer that for yourself. And then you always have to answer, the 2 like most cosmic questions of human existence, which is, what is the definition of success and how much is enough, right? And if your 17-year-old's definition of success is, I am going to get venture capital money from Kleiner Perkins or some other A-grade venture capital firm for my startup by the time I'm 25, and I want to use my undergraduate education to do that, then it's probably worth thinking pretty hard about borrowing if you need to, so that kid can go to Stanford or Caltech or MIT or Carnegie Mellon,
But I would say,
right?
even in that situation, I would encourage people, and again, this isn't shame, to always run the numbers. So know not what 1 year costs, but know what 4 year costs. And if you're taking out a loan, know what the total cost of the loans are going to be. So throw in the numbers.
Right. I take it for granted that people do that, but I shouldn't. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Okay. So somebody's asking, and again, you're not going to be able to fully answer this, but she's saying, I need specific strategies about how to get more merit money.
Sure. So, the standard, what's become the sort of standard formula, and, you can read about it in the Facebook group. But I talk about it, but, version of it in the book as well, basically just goes like this, right? Figure out, where your kids sort of stands and sits in the firmament of any given applicant pool. And go look at the common data set of the school. Try to figure out what percentage of any given class gets merit aid, and in particular, the one proxy for this is the percentage of people who have no need-based aid, right? The people who could pay full pay. What percentage of those people are getting aid? And in that same common data set, which is which most schools make available, and you can just Google and find, you will be able to see what the top 25% of the incoming class looks like in terms of their academic profile, test scores, GPA, stuff like that. And so if your kid is in the 25% and it isn't even close, there's a pretty good chance that they'll get merit aid and maybe even an above average amount. But the thing that's super annoying about this is that no kid is average, right? And if there isn't predictability baked into the net price calculator that you fill out, and if the school won't do any kind of pre-read, it's hard to know whether to apply because you don't have predictability. And I just find this unconscionable, frankly, right? That there could be a 6-figure swing in the bottom line price of this thing over the course of 4 years, and we don't get to know what the price is before we go through the not inconsequential process of actually having to
That's
apply.
partly what it's also driven up kids applying to more schools because of the unpredictability. Yeah. So you have to cast a wider net because you don't really know what the results are going to come in. And quite honestly, that's even, happened even more so this year because of not really knowing what's going to happen. And the number of applications per student has, increased tremendously.
Yeah, I hate for that to be the moral of the story, but if I'm in the market for merit aid, and depending on what happens with my daughters, we may well be. I'm applying to more than 10 schools. I'm looking for the lottery ticket, and if it means that 2 or 3 of those schools are schools where we know that they would get in, and it's just a question of how much of an above average merit aid package they might get, so be it, because that's sort of how you got to play the game if you're trying to, if you're in the shoes of the questioner and you're trying to get more aid from more than one school.
So, and just to summarize, and kind of somebody asked earlier, and I said are we going to ask specific questions, and I said it was important. I think personally, it's important that you understand the system, kind of before you can even dig in, because if you understand the system, then you understand what pieces of the system you need to know more about. And so for this particular question, just, you need to understand how colleges give out money. It sounds kind of simple, but there are, specific statistics, and I won't go into a lot of detail. We can talk about it another time, but you have to know how much they are giving out to families with need, how much they're giving out to families without need. And as Ron mentioned, kind of what's the spectrum of students that they're looking for, and does your student fit at the top? It's kind of like the quick and dirty of how you go about it.
Sure. And just one other thing that, makes this ever more complicated. So, I was in the office of, a couple dozen vice presidents of enrollment managements by the time this was all over. And, voices were raised more than once with schools that refused to provide much of any predictability about how this works. And, the guy at Case Western, a very experienced admissions professional, extremely data driven. He said, "What do you want from me, Ron?" He said, "If I was to make you a merit aid prediction engine," he said, "the only thing it would be good for is telling you what this year's kid might have gotten last year. He said, "I can't account for whether Ohio State is going to build a new honors dorm and that's going to throw everything skyward." And he said, "I can't account for Carnegie Mellon deciding that they're going to all of a sudden be more aggressive with their merit aid offers because we've picked too many kids up." He said, I don't have the ability to predict that because they are not doing the very same thing that you're asking me to do, which would tip their sort of competitive strategy so that we could see it and respond to it in real time. So what do you want from me?" And I said, "Well, how about just making last year's data more clear so people don't have to dig around,
Right.
For it in the common data set with a disclaimer that says, last year's performance is not indicative of future results." I said that would go a long way. And he sort of mumbled, and we agreed to disagree.
Okay, I'm going to switch because there were a ton of questions earlier about early decision. And that's kind of also another, big topic. I'll just throw out some questions, related to, what happens with merit aid and early decision, and, how binding is that? Those are kind of like some of the big questions that, and should like what type of thought process should go into whether you're going to let your student apply early decision, depending on what your financial situation is?
Sure. Okay. I mean, let's just start with the baseline here, which is that early decision is classist. And, as somebody who was on financial aid myself, I'm not a big fan of systems that are classist. And so, I spend more than a little time thinking about what, if anything, I could do, to break early decision, with the platform that I have. And I have some ideas that, I haven't had the courage yet to unload in the newspaper, but let me just say this, right? I think these questions come not from people who have demonstrated financial need. Because if you have demonstrated financial need, the school, through its net price calculator, has to sort of, they sort of have to give you a financial aid offer if you get in early decision that somehow resembles the net price calculator, right? Because otherwise there's no point of those calculators existing, and there would be blood in the streets and anger. And so I think those folks are generally taken care of, particularly at schools that are more resource rich. This question tends to come from people who do not qualify for much need-based aid, but can't possibly write a check for the full amount, but want the admissions advantage, often a big one, that comes from applying early. And they don't know what to do because they can't predict what, if any, merit will result. And so, and you're right to be skeptical of the schools, because if you're in the admissions officer's shoes, you don't want to use your precious discounting budget on people who have raised their hand and said, I'm going to come no matter what, right? You'd be nuts to give a lot of money to those folks. It doesn't make any sense. And so I guess my feeling about it is this, if it's not Whitman, if it's not Worcester, if it's not a school that bakes merit aid predictability into the net price calculator, if you get an early decision and the offer is not to your liking, you should take a walk. Early decision is not binding. Let me say that again. Early decision is not binding. It is not legally binding. It is not ethically binding if the school does not predict for you what it is actually going to cost. Now that last part is like, an opinion, but every month, at least, those of you who spend a lot of time on the boards, right, you'll see these debates break out. Well, if you walk away from your early decision commitment, then your high school guidance counselor won't work with you anymore and they won't send your grades out. If somebody has a documented case of that actually happening, I want to know about it and I want to write about it in the New York Times, because schools shouldn't be doing that. Every single person I've ever talked to at a college says, of course, if they can't afford the number that we offer an early decision, of course it's okay for them to walk away. And then I say to them, well, aren't you going to hold it against like the juniors and the sophomores from that high school and like punish the high school because some kid, took a walk on their early decision commitment? And they look at me cross-eyed and they're like, what are you talking about? They're like, we don't have time to keep score on that stuff. And even if we did, we'd be nuts to hold grudges, because then word gets out, not just in that high school, but in the community, that we're like big nasties and, and that we treat people badly. And like, don't forget, Ron, like we're in the marketplace for talent here, and we can't just like go around offending 20 high schools a year, or 50 or 100. And so I guess I wish a few more people would walk away.
Right.
And and if there are horror stories out there of people actually being punished for it, I've never seen them. I've never heard from them. I've looked pretty hard for them. I continue to look hard for them. There are now 860 of you out there. If you have one, please send it to me. I am easy to find, because again, I have some ideas about how to break this thing wide open, but I can't do it without some help.
Right. Okay. So you guys, I saw a few comments. So if you want to actually send me, some people mentioned a few schools. If you want to send them to me or send them to Ron, that's fine. But let's send them Ron's way so that he can look into them. So kind of along the same lines, I get that particular, well, now, because it's January, I've gotten some questions from families I particularly one, a mother whose son got into MIT. Great, they're very excited, right? They got into MIT early action. And now she's asking, where are good places to look for private scholarships? Because they obviously, are realizing now that they can't, well, they're going to have to take out loans to really afford it. Luckily, in that case, it's early action. But I have to ask you, the one thing I didn't see that much in the book about is private scholarships. I know that's like a business onto its own. And kind of like, what do you think about that? Because whether we believe it or not, people see private scholarships as a piece of paying for college.
Yeah, it was a repertorial blind spot of mine, because I began with the bias that most of these scholarship search services were scammy, if not outright scams, and that for the vast majority of people that this was going to be wasted effort, and they would be better off trying to find, the diamond in the rough school, or the one that offer outsized merit aid, or taking a close look at the honors program or the honors college at their flagship state university or the local branch of it. And it's possible that I have that wrong. But it was something that I did not pursue.
Okay. I mean, I my personal opinion too is, I don't know if scammy is the word, but somebody actually in the industry once said the words to me that it is a dirty business. And so anyhow, I would use it as a last resort, not as like a major place that you're going to get money from. But somebody's asking, maybe if you could talk a little bit about if you think that there's a difference between applying early action and potentially getting merit money, or does it work similarly to early decision?
We are outside of the lanes that I traveled in my reporting on that one too, and so I'm going to take a pass on that one. It's early decision and the binding nature of it that that's the bone that I have in my mouth right now, and early action. It's a different set of rules, and therefore a different set of economics sitting behind it.
Okay. So there was also a lot of questions, and makes sense. And you actually have a whole chapter in the book about appealing. And this is again January. Some of the offers are starting to come in for students and families, and they're comparing them. And so, how do they decide if they should appeal? And then kind of like, there's like a whole system and processes around also appealing.
Yeah. So you've got nothing to lose. Like literally nothing, nothing's gonna be taken away from you if you take your shot, right? So, I somewhat, there's a part of me that resists, or is reluctant to encourage everybody to just flood these offices, because it makes it very hard on the professionals who work there. But if you feel like you didn't get, what you thought you should have, then take your shot, right? I mean, even if it's an extra $2,000 a year, $8,000 over 4 years, that's real money. That's a big deal. And so, I outlined this in the book, right? But the tactics and the processes are different depending on whether you're appealing merit aid or need-based financial aid. And sometimes people don't understand that. And sometimes it's confused deliberately by the schools themselves, who take the merit aid and use it to apply to your demonstrated need. That gets really messy, right? The schools do that because they want you to feel like you've gotten a gold star as a parent or as a student, for being very meritorious, when they're really just kind of giving you a discount that doesn't come from the endowment. They're just throwing out coupons, right? But they're trying to dress it up in something that will make you feel good. But in general, merit aid gets appealed to admissions, financial aid gets appealed to the financial aid office. When you're appealing merit aid, it's generally most helpful to either have not just a better number, not just a better discount offer, a better bottom line price that has been offered to you by an institution that is legitimately competitive.
Can
with
I
the
just
one
stop
that
you
you're
there
considering. Yeah.
for 1 second in that concept? Would you, kind of knowing what you just said right there, would you then kind of go backwards and actually suggest to people to potentially, when they create their child's list, to think about, is there kind of like a competitive school to put on the list, to have that as something to kind of go into the appeal process? Just an idea.
Yes.
And
Right?
that's
You're
what we
trying
have
to
to get.
you're trying to set yourself up
Yes.
to be in the best possible negotiating position. And so, yeah, right. Let's say your kid is a writer and an English major and really wants to go to Kenyon, and found the campus environment at Oberlin totally off-putting. I'd still apply to both because a merit offer from Oberlin is going to be meaningful to Kenyon. And maybe that works out for you. I think it's, I think it's worth a $100 application fee to
Exactly.
potentially have a $4,000 difference that can net you $16,000 for that $100 investment. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So with the merit aid, right, you're appealing to the admissions office. Hopefully you've got a different offer in mind, and a different offer, a better offer, sitting in your hand, and you just approach innocently and say, I think it's possible that maybe we made some mistake here. Was there something else that we should have told you, about our kid's situation? Because, we ended up with a different result and the applications are different. So, is there anything else that you'd like to know from us, about what's gone on in the last 4 years, or what's going on in the last 4 months since we applied, that might make you see things differently, right? Then you're not grabby, you're not demanding, you're not insulting. You're being modest and approaching with some humility. With need-based financial aid, it's really all about, has there been a change in your family's circumstances, such that the financial aid officer will have the leeway that she or he needs to be able to document the reason for a change. And so, that could be a job loss, but could also just be, a change in income. If you have variable compensation, it could be outsized healthcare expenses, something related to an aging parent, a child with mental health issues that cost you a lot of money, a natural disaster, could be any number of things. And then, right, Kenyon, Oberlin, need-based aid, if you've got different packages, different bottom line prices, again, you can make that same approach, even if your circumstances have not changed. Hey, I just wanted to bring this to your attention. I feel like maybe we might have sent you the wrong numbers or done something wrong in our application, because we got a different result over here. And actually you're our first choice. But the $4,000 difference is a difference that makes a difference, because that'll be $16,000 in loans that we won't have to take out. And is it possible that we messed something up here? Right. And if they throw you a $1,000 or $2,000 bone, well, that adds up to, $68 a month or whatever it is that your kid won't be paying in student loans if the price changes. And so again, you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain.
You know what I love that you describe in the book, and somebody's asking, should the parent or the student write the appeal letter? And I think maybe when you answer that, to also describe in the book, you basically tell about how the people on the other end are humans too, and to kind of think about who they are, who's going to receive, this letter, whether they're in admissions or financial aid, and kind of sit in their shoes a little bit.
Yeah. So to take that last part first, just remember that when you work at a public institution, some of you who do so probably know this, your salaries are often uppable, right? So I went looking up a whole bunch of financial aid administrators at various schools around the country. I think the University of Wisconsin, the flagship state school, is the one that I included in the book. The second in command at the financial aid office at the University of Wisconsin, with, all 722,000 undergraduates, whatever it is they have there. It's an enormous place. The second in command at the financial aid office is not even earning 6 figures yet. So if you do, and you're asking for more money, just keep that vibe in mind, right? When you approach and you say that you just can't do this, right? Just keep that vibe in mind. Debbie, now I'm forgetting what the other part of the question
About the
was.
parent or the student should
Oh,
write it.
yeah. So here's yet another thing where like all we're dealing with here is anecdata, right? Nobody has done a study, and you never could, right? You never could do like an all things being equal scientific study where like you send the parent in and then you send the kid in with the same
Right.
information, with the same script, the same race, the same gender, the same day, the same person. There's no way to do this with science. And so my hunch is that a kid is going to be more effective. And my hunch is that doing it in person is going to be more effective if you get there for an admitted students day. So that's probably not going to happen this spring for most people. But the risk of having a kid write the letter is that it may sound like a grown-up ghost wrote it. So you have to be careful about that. And then if a kid goes into a room alone with a financial aid administrator, that the kid may not have all of the data at their fingertips, or may not have fluency in it, which makes the conversations about the finer points of home equity valuation at a private institution that taxes your home equity, that can be a difficult conversation for a teenager to have. So all we're working on here are hunches, but my hunch is that the right kid can end up with a better result under the right circumstances.
So let me just read. This is Courtney Blavelt. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your last name correctly. She said, as a former financial aid administrator, I can't love what Ron just said enough. So.
Oh, that's so nice. Wait, what did I say?
I'm thinking of just about being, thinking of like the human side of the people who are working in these departments.
Thank you. As much as what I'm doing here may feel like oppositional, and as much as I, sometimes use like, militaristic analogies, I don't feel like the people on the other side of this are the enemy. These are all well-meaning people who inherited a system. They didn't build it. Who inherited a system that they don't really like all that much themselves. And when you like liquor them up at conferences, they say so. And so nobody's happy about how this thing has evolved. All I'm trying to do for the people I have contact with is make them way above average in smarts, and way below average in profitability for these institutions.
Okay, another topic, and again, this wasn't in your book, and I'm wondering if you came across it, or what your thoughts are. The term micro scholarships.
Sure.
And so, I'm sorry, I had a particular question from a woman, and maybe you can explain a little bit what micro scholarships is, and she's wondering if that's like another tool that schools are using in this merit aid game.
So when I hear micro scholarships, I think back to being at a conference and meeting with the founder of a company that helps schools offer them. And Debbie,
Yes.
You'll remember what it's called. What is
it's
it called?
Raise Me.
Raise Me, right.
Yep.
I ended up not putting it in the book because my sense of it was, it's like, you could spend all this time and energy on it, but like, it's just a way to effectively replace the merit aid or the discounts they would offer you anyway. And then a whole bunch of your data ends up with some third-party company, and what are they going to do with it, right?
Sell it.
And so I didn't have a problem with it. I guess just my gut sense of it, my assessment of it was that you could spin a lot of wheels messing around in that system, or you could spin a lot of wheels and use your brain cells to dissect common data sets and more effectively target the institution that's more likely to give you an outsized amount, as opposed to trying to earn it by jumping through flaming hoops for some startup.
100%, and that's exactly personally my opinion. And that's if you go to the Paying for College 101 group, that's like 90% of the people's opinions too who have used it. They felt like it was a little bit of a waste of time. They didn't end up in any spot differently than where they would have if they hadn't used it. Except for, I will tell you, Ron, except for one person who told me just the other day, because the other, the way this works is that the money that you get from Raise Me, people thought it would be in addition to merit money, and it's actually just baked in. But I will tell you, at Whitman College, for this one particular family, did add it in addition.
Huh. Okay.
So that's kind of
right.
adds
Sometimes
to
it can
your,
work.
yeah.
And I think there's a school of thought that suggests, in tuition fit. Mark Salisbury's operation, it intends to operate this way too. That's a different sort of merit aid discovery vehicle. In an ideal world, right? If a for-profit entity is collecting your data in the course of your research and your applications, in a perfect world, that that entity can introduce you to a school that might be slightly more generous than the ones you were considering, that maybe you've never even heard of or hadn't stopped to think about. Then maybe it's worth giving up your data for something like that. It's still early days. Admit, right. MIT is another one that operates this way in some instances. And I'm glad to see, people trying to innovate, right? But the fact that all of these for-profit entities, these startups have come out of the woodwork to try and make this easier is just like yet another reminder, as if we need one. That it shouldn't be this way, right? I shouldn't have had to write this book.
Right.
I'm annoyed that I did, and I don't think it's going to get any better. And the people who I spoke to, about this, who are inside the system, don't really think it's going to get much better anytime soon either.
Okay, one last topic, and I know we've gone on past an hour, and this is something. Maybe this will be a future article for you, but something that I've gotten a lot of questions about lately is people seriously looking into moving to different states that have better, in-state tuition. I mean, that they're thinking about it in 9th and 10th grade, their kids in 9th and 10th grade, because they see this looming, and in the state that they're in, they know they can't even afford the state university. And so they're looking at other states that have significantly lower state schools and considering moving their whole family for this purpose.
Yeah, so I grew up in Illinois. That state is a fiscal basket case. And, the state university system is being profoundly affected by it. And so, that strikes me as a pretty severe move, right? But if it's 30 miles over the border into Wisconsin and your kid is Madison material, I mean, that's a great school, right?
Well, that's easy. I've had people who are talking that they are from California and they are looking into like North Carolina and Florida.
So that's fascinating, right? That's its own thing, right? In California now, you need like a 6.8 grade point average to get into Davis, right? I mean, it's just gone completely bonkers there. And so, and North Carolina, California used to be, the best value among the elite state institutions, but they were so crushed by the recession in 2008, 2009, tuition's kind of gone to the moon. North Carolina may be the best value out there. I think Florida has been trying hard to like buy its way into prestige, and it's succeeded in certain regards, but then you have to live in Florida. Sorry. we're having major Florida issues in my family right now. There are parts of Florida that I love.
Anyhow, something to kind of keep on your radar. And last question, because this came up a lot. This is, I think, should be a little bit on the quick side, but maybe not. People are asking kind of, where can you figure out, or where is there a list that kind of shows the competitors, the way we're talking about it, of different schools?
Would somebody make that? Would somebody make that for us?
We could.
It's occurred to me more than once to try and put that together. That's not data that gets the actual
But how would you
data.
define a competitor?
So I'll tell you how the schools define it.
Yeah.
Because they're trying to do a bunch of work from May 1st to June 15th every year, to figure out who they lost their admitted students to that did not matriculate. So the schools know, and every so often this sort of creeps out into public. Like, if you want to appeal your need-based aid at Cornell, they have this like awesomely transparent thing on the financial aid website that basically just says, yeah, if you got into Harvard, Yale, or Princeton and like got a better offer, like hit us up, right? And if you didn't, don't bother, is basically what it says, right? So you know who they think they're competing with. So just
so people are actually putting some suggestions in there saying, look at Fisk. I'm staring because I have the Fisk book right there. Maybe I'll look. I haven't really looked at it in that way.
Yeah, I haven't looked at Fisk in a while. So does it actually say if you're applying to schools, if you're applying to this school? No, I can't put my hands on it. But if you're applying to this school,
somebody said look at the overlaps on Fisk. That's a good idea.
Overlaps on Fisk. Thank you.
Okay, and then somebody else said to Google peer institutions and then the name of the school.
And Google will just spit that out at you? That's cool. See, yeah. I'm always learning something from this community still, a lot, not just a little. So I continue to be grateful to be part of it. And, for those of you who are new here or showed up because you read about it in my newsletter or heard about it in the book, keep coming back.
Yes, every day I learn something new, the way somebody, figured out a different resource or something happened at that school that I didn't know that was actually going to happen. So, yeah. Well, thank you, Ron. This has been amazing. Thank you, everybody who stayed as long as you did. This is, went longer than I expected. But again, as I knew that there was going to be so much information, we've just put the book up. I'm going to hold it up again. This, again, we just covered the top of all of these deep subjects. You can, this book, and Ron, I hope if you're okay, I'm going to show Jeff's book because the two of these together will give you everything you need to know on all angles of getting your kid into college and figuring out how to pay for it. So thank you, Ron. It was great talking to you. And I always send an email with a link to this recording. And I'm also going to send a link to Wednesday's Facebook Live, where I'm going to take all of the questions, and there were a ton that I didn't get to, and we're going to talk even more, and we're going to have some parents ask their own questions. Okay?
All right. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.